Welcome everybody. I'm very glad to be here tonight, and my name is Giorgio Ventre. I am the Director of the Information Technology Department at the University of Napoli Federico II. But tonight I have the very big pleasure to host this event. This is sparring talk with Laur Hesser Fisher and with the other distinguished speaker from our area. As you know, the talk is about connecting minds for climate action. That is a very important issue nowadays. And before starting with the talk, I'm very happy to welcome and to give the floor to Karen Schinnerer from the US Consulate in Napoli that helped us in organize this talk. And we are very grateful to them to be as usual, very close to us, to everything we try to organize in now. So, Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giorgio, and good afternoon. I'm Karen Schinnerer, the Press and Culture Consul here at the U.S. Consulate General in Naples. First, I would like to thank the organizers of this online edition of the prestigious science festival Futuro Remoto, and in particular, the president of Città della Scienza, Dr. Riccardo Villari, and the president of the scientific committee, Professor Luigi Nicolai. During these difficult times due to the global pandemic, we've all had to adjust and adapt, become a lot more flexible. And Città della Scienza also found quickly how to innovate and be creative in order to adapt their annual festival to this virtual format, so that we're all able to still join together to celebrate and to learn and to further the importance of science and technology in our global society. It is thanks to this innovative technology that we're able to all be here today, connecting from all over the world, including the United States. The U.S. Consulate and Città della Scienza are long-term friends and partners, and we share an interest to promote STEM disciplines and find improved ways to build a better, more sustainable and inclusive future for us all. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Professor Giorgio Ventre, Director of the Apple Academy in Naples, for joining us today. It's great to see him. And the Academy is another important partner for the consulate. We hope to continue to collaborate with him in the future as well. And finally, I would like to greet our main guest speaker from the United States, Laura Hesser Fisher. She's the Program Director for Public Engagement at the Environmental Solutions Initiative at the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, better known as MIT. She's a leader in her field, and we're very grateful to her for her time today to represent the United States and lead what I know will be an interesting and fruitful discussion for us all. And I look forward to attending some more online events this week with Futuro Remoto. And of course, we all hope that in the coming months, in the coming year, we'll be able to do all of this in person and greet each other once again and continue our important work together. Grazie e buon futuro remoto 2020 a tutti.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, that is Laur Hesser Fisher. She's Program Director for Public Engagement Environmental Solution Initiative at the MIT, and she's an impressive background in the area of talking and explaining about the issues related on climate change and environmental issues. So I'm very, very grateful to her for being with us, particularly in this week. There is Thanksgiving, so thank you very much for being available in a sort of a holiday week in the United States. And I mean, the news from the United States are that we are going to look at the United States again as a beacon for initiative in the area of climate change from the political point of view. All of us are very happy about this. So thank you again for being with us. So the floor is yours. We are looking forward to hear from you and to have interaction with our guests. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Professor Ventre and Karen Schinner and event organizers and everyone else who participated in putting this together. We're finding opportunity in these challenging times. It's my pleasure to be able to be here with you from across the ocean and for you to tune in wherever in the world you are from today. So we have to keep looking for those opportunities. So as already been mentioned, I'm Laur Hesser Fisher, Program Director at the MIT Environmental Solutions Initiative. Before I was with ESI, I was with the Climate CoLab project, which was out of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. And now I really focus my time on engaging and communicating about climate change. I know that this conference is very much focused on science and technology, and my talk is to help us look at also the intersection of science and technology with the political and social realities in which we find ourselves. So I'm going to start by giving you a lay of the land of where we are right now in the United States when it comes to climate action, and what new opportunities, but then also challenges lie ahead for us. So as many of you are very aware, the election results in the US chart a new path for us in many ways, including for climate change. Climate change wasn't a priority for President Trump. As you likely know, he pulled the US out of the Paris Agreement and either ignored or dismissed the scientific community's consensus on the perils of unstopped climate change. But even so, action on climate change has not stopped over the past 4 years. It's just become a little more decentralized. So to give a few examples, after Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Agreement, something called the US Climate Alliance was formed, which now holds and boasts the participation of over 25 US states, that's about half of them, and 55% of the US population. And that represents 40% of the US greenhouse gas emissions. And these states pledged to pass policies that advance the goals of the Paris Agreement, and they've been working on this since 2017. There are also over 600 local governments, like cities and counties, that have created climate action plans. Some of America's biggest corporations, like Google and Amazon and Microsoft, have made commitments to achieve net zero emissions. And of course, colleges and universities have continued and in many cases actually expanded their work on climate change. So just as one example, this summer MIT launched its Climate Grand Challenges to funnel hundreds of millions of dollars into tackling the greatest technological and socioeconomic hurdles around decarbonizing and preparing for climate impacts. But as Professor Ventre mentioned, the world doesn't need to rely on the subnational actors in the US for too much longer. And the elections of earlier this month, November 2020, altered our country's trajectory in many ways, including on climate change. And starting in January, when President-elect Biden comes into office, he has promised to put the US back in the Paris Agreement, as well as has an ambitious plan for climate action. So in anticipation of this, things have already started changing. We're not waiting until January. As just one example, just earlier this week, GM, General Motors, which is a major US automaker, has stopped opposing California in limiting emissions for vehicles and signaled that it's ready to start working with the Biden administration on climate targets. So some things that were stuck over the last 4 years have now become unstuck. But you should know that the path ahead for Biden's climate action plan isn't going to be smooth or necessarily easy. Now, climate change is a scientific fact, like the existence of COVID-19, and whether or not to act on it should not be a partisan issue. Though, unfortunately, in the US, it still is. In fact, the biggest indicator of whether or not an American believes that our current climate change is happening and is being caused by humans is, sadly, their political affiliation. So there are a number of factors for why this is, and I'm happy to share more about it in the Q&A. But for now, we'll move on. You might be thinking, well, Biden's a Democrat, right? He won the election. So why does this partisan divide matter now? Well, even though Biden won the presidential election, the American government is still divided between Democrats and Republicans. So I'll avoid giving you a US civics lesson for now, but what's most important to know is that we do not yet know if the US Senate will be controlled by Democrats or by Republicans. We'll know in January when there's a second round of voting in the state of Georgia for the 2 Senate seats there, which is why a lot of attention right now in the United States is focused on Georgia. And if the Senate is controlled by Republicans, bills that prioritize climate change over other issues will likely not pass. This is somewhat a similar situation to what happened in the US with President Bill Clinton and the Kyoto Protocol to limit greenhouse gas emissions back in 1997. So you might remember that the president, along with many other countries, negotiated the international protocol, but there was a Republican-controlled Senate then, and so it wasn't ratified in the US. In fact, I think that Clinton didn't even bring the treaty before the Senate because he knew that it wouldn't pass, so it didn't even make it onto the floor. So that all is to say, it's not that there aren't many notable Republicans who are calling for action on climate change, because there are. In fact, 2 former Republican US Secretaries of State, James Baker and George Shultz, are very vocal and support a price on carbon emissions. And there are many, many other conservative climate groups that have formed to support action. That being said, they haven't yet been able to sway the current Republican leadership, which will likely be influenced by Trump for the foreseeable future. So all this is to say that the situation in the US is complicated. And this complication matters. We can't ignore it because we need to make big moves and we need to do it quickly. You probably know very well that scientists predict that we can avoid the worst threats of climate change if by 2030, we cut global carbon emissions in about half. And by 2050, we don't emit any more carbon emissions than the planet can absorb each year. This is something that's called net zero. So that's net zero carbon emissions cutting carbon emissions by half in 10 years, and then net zero in 30 years. That is coming up really fast. So how do we work on these huge, rapidly approaching goals with people who don't prioritize climate change? I hope that you're not experiencing the same kind of issue in Italy, but I'm sure it exists everywhere. At MIT, I lead a project called Here in Real. It's dedicated to direct engagement with US regions as they tackle conversations around climate change and an emerging low carbon economy. So as I shared before, there is an incredible amount of work happening across the United States on climate change by states and cities and companies and universities, but also by nonprofit organizations and journalists and many, many, many others. But I really wanted to focus on the unengaged, the uninterested, places where there is resistance to even the words climate change. So I focused on parts of the country that rely on fossil fuels for their local economy. So in particular, I worked in the state of Wyoming, which produces 40% of the US's coal, and in Western Pennsylvania, which is a hub for coal mining and fracking natural gas in the state. When I started working with people in these states, at first, it didn't sound like they were at all interested in climate change. I mean, they certainly would not have put it that way. But as coal was leaving for a myriad of issues, they were concerned about the future of their community. So that's what we spoke with them about. When people heard that I was speaking their language, they started to listen and they wanted to engage. But that started with me listening. I wanted to engage with people who didn't care about climate change or actively opposed climate action. So first, I got interested in their experience, what they see, what's important to them, what they're concerned about. And we talked about how addressing climate change also helped solve the problem that they cared most about, which was their state and their communities. And in collaboration, we explored the financial realities that they faced and what's coming in the future with the decarbonized economy and their current tax structures. And with Wyoming, we also looked at their low carbon assets and how they could build upon those to remain financially stable in the future. So maybe you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm not a climate activist. I'm not going into communities to talk about climate change, so this doesn't really relate to me. So let me pivot for a moment. In my introduction, I mentioned that I worked at the Climate CoLab, which was a project of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. There we crowdsourced solutions for climate change, which with over 100,000 people in our global community, including some of the top experts on climate change, as well as a number of people who had never really worked on it or thought much about it before. And I learned many, many lessons from my time at Climate CoLab, and I want to share just two of them. One is that there are an incredible number of passionate and talented people around the world working on climate change. Many of them are in this virtual meeting room right now. It is uplifting and astounding. And being a part of this global movement keeps me going. Second thing that I want to share is that addressing climate change is complicated. It is very, very complicated, both in terms of eliminating emissions from our economy and in preparing for the change that we're already starting to see. To meet our goals, we need to engage all kinds of expertise and skills: pure science, applied science, technology development and deployment, engineering, micro and macro economics, entrepreneurship, politics, law, psychology, intersections with poverty, equity, and justice, humanitarian causes, and many, many others, as well as often overlooked expertise like local knowledge and building trust. There is not just one sector or type of work that solves the issue of climate change. It's quite the opposite. We need all kinds of professionals in all different fields, incorporating the realities of climate into their work. Now, this doesn't even mean that you need to pivot and dedicate yourself and your career 100% to climate change, though I wouldn't mind if you did that. You each have your expertise and your talents and your passions. I urge you to use them to excel and make incredible change in this world. But bring along with you the climate reality that we face. If you're a student, I'm not telling you to suddenly become an environmental science major. Instead, I invite you to take a class on climate change and get curious about how these issues intersect with what you're most passionate about. In my work today, I collaborate with big data scientists, computer scientists, engineers, economists, anthropologists, architects, and people from an incredible number of fields on applying their talents to this challenge. If you're an entrepreneur, you're a problem solver. And our current situation presents many unprecedented problems that need solving. And if you're already up and running, if your business is up and running, I ask, how can you help normalize climate change with your employees and your customers? And how will your company operate in a net zero emissions world in 2030, in just 10 years? If you're a faculty member, you're cultivating and equipping the next generation of minds. And even for a moment, turn their attention to this complex challenge and opportunity that climate change presents. And for all of you out there, if nothing else, talk about climate change. That is how we normalize it. And that's how it starts to get embedded into our actions. And if you don't know where to start, I put some links in the chat. I'll send those now to some digital learning opportunities that exist at MIT. There's our award-winning Climate Primer, which gives you a 101, an introduction to the science behind what we know and what we don't know about climate change, as well as an introduction to the risks and the solutions in this area. There's ongoing learning opportunities on climate change from MIT at our climate portal, climate.mit.edu, where MIT faculty and experts explain and help orient readers to different issues related to climate change, as well as answer pressing questions that people have. You can submit your own questions. I also run a podcast, demystifying complicated climate change topics, just the facts, just the science, not getting into politics, in quick 10-minute episodes. That's called Today I Learned Climate. I'd like to close these remarks by saying thank you. So you may know that tomorrow is American Thanksgiving, where we take a few days to pause and to be appreciative for what we have and for those around us. And in a world where it can still be quite easy to do nothing, to shut things out and just to trudge on with the status quo, here you are participating today, doing something that tells me that you're someone who cares, someone who is curious, who is passionate, maybe also who is committed. And that's not to be underestimated. And I'm thankful for that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of my co-presenters today about the projects and amazing work that they're doing, as well as take your questions and continue the conversation.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for for being with us, and thank you for your presentation. And so I guess now, the program is quite rich because we have two things we need to do. The first is to get questions from the attendees, and I'm looking forward to get questions that the organization is giving you the information about how to ask your questions. But in the meantime, I would like to introduce our co-presenters today. The organizer had this very brilliant idea to have other presentation on the climate issue and the research ongoing in the area of Napoli, and also about the projects that are related to the environment that are going on in our universities and in the Apple Developer Academy. So I will start with a first talk from Francesco Napolitano. Francesco is works with Wolfia. Wolfia is a startup and is getting a lot of success in their work. They work in the area of helping companies in dispose properly the production scraps in the area of composite materials that are quite problematic as an issue. And so it's a pleasure for me to give the floor to Francesco.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your introduction. Thank you for your speech. So I just show the slides in order to support my talk. Some slides. So why Wolfia was born? Okay. Because one day in visiting one company which produces composite material, we found these pieces. These pieces are ready to become scraps, waste. So we ask ourselves, is it right to dispose of useful materials? No, for us it's not right to dispose these materials because they generate, after the disposal, they generate some dangerous compounds for the planet and human. Moreover, manufacturers that produce these scraps after the production of their pieces, their work pieces, are not in contact with the buyers. So the scraps are not included in a circular economy concept. So they appear like this to us, like people that waste their money, disposing the scraps that are useful for some other which are buyers that can use this material. So became the idea of Wolfia, which name is inspired by the smallest flower existing in nature and its incredible adaptability to the ecosystem and its change. Because we think that the human have to adapt to the change that now appear in the world. Wolfia is a platform, but it's not a simple platform on which you can put the material, the scraps, in order to put them for the buyers then can buy these materials. No, Wolfia aimed to share the experience through the services to our customers, such as the evaluation of the carbon footprint, the forum on which we can discuss about the circular economy, and the event, such as lesson, webinar, or other events through we want to disseminate the idea and our mission. Also, the warehouse we will have is projected in order to pursue our mission. So with the traceability of the material and storage optimization in order to save space, energy, and the transport movements, in order to save also CO2 emissions. And the forecast and control of the provisions with the aim to monitor the materials, the disposal of the materials, and the reuse ratio of this material. All begin because we are researcher, PhD student, or postdoc, each one having a specific background on the composite material. So we suffered some of this problem during our work experience. We are grateful to startup competition, which awards us with some awards, and we are grateful to Campagna University Incubator, which support us in this experience. I leave here our contact button because we want to say that it's important to start the change from the network, from the social network, and from the web, because through the web we can grow the consciousness about these problems. And I end my talk with our motto, which is the best waste is no waste. And the question that we do ourselves every day, having suitable instruments made the community experience the same feeling about raw materials and recovered materials. Thank you for your attention. So if you have some question,
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you very much for your presentation, and congratulations for your startup. I mean, it's a very, I was aware about it, but I'm very happy to that you are going on, and so my best wishes for all of you. And waiting for more questions, and before giving the floor to the students of the Apple Academy, let me exploit my role as a moderator of this talk. And let me ask Laura a question. I mean, you are working on the communication on this very important MIT initiative. That's a very challenging initiative. What is your idea? How much is important the communication when we talk about awareness and a cultural change of mind in particularly in the area of the climate change?
Yes, well, a lot of it, I guess to give a little bit more detail to your question is communication with whom, right? Who do we need to be talking to? Who do we need to involve in these conversations? There is research around political influence and public opinion and what influences public opinion and vice versa. And what that research actually finds is that the political elites of a party, so for example, if you run the Democratic Party and you're a Democrat, or if you run the Republican Party and you're a Republican, those political leaders influence the opinions of the people who are a part of that party. So I would say then that communication and engagement with people who are the kind of elites of a political party is incredibly important if you're trying to move action quickly and aggressively on climate change. And some of the materials that that we have created is for a wide public audience, what we call the climate curious. So people who have heard about climate change, and maybe they've heard that it's real, maybe they heard that it's not real, or that it's human caused or not, and they really want to understand what the best science is about it, but they're not quite sure exactly where to go. MIT is a trusted brand in the United States. People see it as a nonpartisan place to get scientific and engineering information and advances. Unlike, frankly, there are other colleges and universities in the United States that don't have that kind of similar reputation. So we really wanted to take advantage of that in a positive way and provide these kinds of materials so we can share with the world that this exists. And it's a very real thing, and it's something that MIT, as well as the majority of institutions and organizations and governments around the world, see as a priority. The one, really briefly, the one additional thing I'll add is that there's kind of this federal policy that can be created, but then when it comes to adaptation issues or actually launching some of these technologies on the ground, you need cooperation and you need local and industry knowledge. So in order to get that, there's a communication aspect, but that's why we also use the word engagement, right? It's not just kind of blasting it out there and saying, you should listen to us because this is the truth. It's really sitting down, having a conversation, understanding their side, engaging with, partnering with, co-creating. And we find that to be a much more effective way to create lasting change.
Thank you very much. And so let me move on the second presentation. This is scheduled. This is going to be the one from the students of the Apple Developer Academy. Inside the Apple Developer Academy, we have a program. This is called the Peer, when we host the students that want to stay with us for a second year, and we ask them to work on NGOs and non-profit organizations on social innovation projects. And this presentation is going to be an initiative that I'm very proud of, and it is related to the cooperation with the Barefoot College in Rajasthan in India. So it's a pleasure for me to leave the floor to Maria and to Morena to present what you are doing in my academy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor, for the introduction, and thank you all for having us here. So I have a few slides to share to accompany our presentation. Okay, so today we'd just like to offer our perspective on this incredible and essential topic of climate change by offering our perspective. We are the Fireflies. We are a group of developers from the Apple Developer Academy in Naples, and as Professor Ventra mentioned, we're working in partnership with Barefoot College, which is an Indian-based NGO. My name is Esther. I have Morena today speaking with me, and the other team members, Andrea, Claudia, Girolamo, and Andrea, are listening to us at this very moment. Involving developing countries in the battle against climate change is not only useful, it is essential. First of all, because climate change is a global problem that requires a global solution and shared responsibilities. But even more because there are key environmental issues directly connected to development. Developed countries, for example, often require carbon-intensive industries to grow economically, and they have usually fast-growing populations that, of course, cause an increased demand for energy. So we see countries in East Asia and the Pacific and South Asia that have experienced extreme reductions in poverty, but increased their carbon emissions by almost 200%. And this is the reason why 2 of the 3 countries most responsible today for CO2 emissions are developing countries. So together with the United States, we're talking about China and India. And it is precisely in India that Barefoot College operates. So this is a country with a massive population. We're talking about 1.53 billion people. Millions of them, mostly women, still live in poverty. And the country also heavily relies on burning firewood and kerosene for electricity, which of course negatively impacts on deforestation and also increases air pollution. So Barefoot College was born in 1972 with the objective of simultaneously addressing this different but essential aspect of well-being. So they work towards solar electrification of rural villages and create job opportunities within this field at the same time. How do they do that? Imagine a girl a scholar, Ayesha. She moves in the Barefoot campus for around 6 months. She cannot read or write, but at Barefoot College, she learns the basic of numeracy and literacy. She learns to question the strict gender norms under which she was brought up. And most importantly, she learns to build, maintain, and sell solar-powered devices. After 6 months, Ayesha has a job. She brings her this solar product, back to her village. She's a Saki. This is basically the Women Prosper program, an initiative by Barefoot College, which is now active in 93 countries around the world and involves more than 2,200 women. So it's a huge impact. But what is our role in this, and how are we aiding this process?
Saki is particularly difficult to do this, especially for this. In order to sell their solar products, they need registered clients. It's a long process which involves around 40 to 60 questions per customers. After this, Barefoot College can offer the beneficiaries subsidies to buy the products. Saki need to demonstrate the products, collect payments, distribute parcels, and all this across different villages and for different clients. To ease their work, we have designed an entire suite of solutions dedicated to Barefoot College, the Barefoot Suite. This is composed of 3 different apps and a framework. The Saki app assists Saki in each of their daily tasks, from registering beneficiaries to showing products, to selling them and collecting money. Everything can be managed by Saki within the app, which also features a low-text UI, giving barefoot women the same opportunities as people with higher literacy levels. The second app of the suite is dedicated to ground partners, which are local entities that assist Saki in every necessary aspect, from monitoring to logistic. The app creates a digital window for them on Saki's tasks and performances, enabling them to support them effectively. Finally, the dashboard app is dedicated to the staff of Barefoot College. The app allows the staff to have a general overview of the program and of all its participants, and to dynamically intervene on all the procedures that the program involves, simplifying them and speeding them up. Everything is coordinating by an invisible and yet essential framework, the Barefoot Kit, which allows for seamless communication between the apps. All this is the Barefoot Suite. We are currently testing 2 of the 3 apps of the suite with our end users, the Saki. Of course, because the current COVID-19 pandemics, we had to organize our testing remotely. So we had a facilitator on the field, interviewing and monitoring the Saki for us. But overall, Saki's response was very positive. 90% of the Saki understood the core UI elements and buttons of the app, completing all the tasks they were asked to perform. Even if literate users managed to use the app and gave positive feedback for it. In the next months, we'll focus on the aspect on the app that still need improving, and also on generally finishing our work on the suite.
Thank you, Morena. Our goal above all is to grant Barefoot College powerful and technologically advanced instruments to aid their work, and to help women like Ayesha bring electricity to the most remote of the villages. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us, or of course to ask them at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Morena. And Laura, this is why I'm very proud of this project. This is very impressive. It's something that shows exactly what you were saying, that you can save the environment and still create job opportunities. That's quite impressive. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean, what I love about it is we have an opportunity, especially in developing countries, as you mentioned, Marino and Esther, of getting it right the first time, right? Rather than going through a very costly transition like we're doing right now. We have an opportunity to support these countries as they build this infrastructure, sometimes for the first time, in doing it in a way that's clean and supports people. And what I also love about the project is it solves multiple problems at the same time. Right? You're giving people access to tools and big business acumen and skills. At the same time, you're providing them with electricity that's clean and renewable. That's wonderful. And Francesco, with your project, Wolfia, I love that you're providing a marketplace where there didn't exist one before. One didn't exist before. And you're empowering people to make smarter choices by giving them access to each other, connecting them, but then also providing information and data for them to make good decisions. So it's exciting to see the creativity and the depth of thinking about these different challenges.
Thank you very much. Let me move on the third presentation. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Mariano Sirignano. He's a young professor at the University of Napoli Federico II. He's a colleague, he's an engineer, and he works inside the Department of Chemistry, Engineering, and Materials. And he's doing a very interesting research, always related to the area of environment protection, and is related to air quality evaluation. Mariano, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'll share my screen, so I hope you can see it. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting us to talk about this topic in this nice environment. And I'm going to talk about air quality evaluation, sure, and in some way I'm going to talk to pollution. But first of all, let me spend one word about one of the things that Laura mentioned in her talk. What we can do for promote climate action is to teach climate change, and this is one of our mission, and it's also one of our topic. Me and my research group with Professor Dana and other colleagues at the university. At our department, in our degree, there is a particular class called environmental chemical engineering, where climate change is taught, and is something that is quite important for us. It's now moved to not an electric eligible class, but it's a mandatory class for master degree students, and it's quite important because I think that if we do our job as best as we can, our students will become the future promoter of actions against climate change. So this is I really appreciate what Laura said, and interestingly, in the class, is one of the things that we try to teach to the students is the difference between something that is some element in the atmosphere that is climate changing, and other elements that are pollutants. One of the problem is that one of the most important of these elements, so particulate matter, is both climate change element and a pollutant itself. So the evaluation of the air quality is not something that is related just to the human health, even if this would be enough by itself, but also the presence of aerosol in the atmosphere is dramatic for its effect direct on the energy earth balance in the climate change, and also indirect effect, something like, for example, the deposition of black carbon on the polar ice is increasing the rate of melting of polar ice. So it's something that has a multiple effect on multiple scales on our life. What I'm going to present here is part of our work, and I'm going to show some of the facilities available at our university, in our lab, where we can trace and monitoring the presence of particulate matter in the atmosphere. But also I want to show you some different new approach, which is something related to data science, which means take advantage of the vastity of data that we have on the web, that singularly will be not enough to draw conclusions and to have enough information of aerosols or air quality in our cities and in our land, but mixing and matching all the data, making what is also called the meta-analysis data or inversion models, it's possible to have much more information. We start from data collection, so what we do, I'd say for living, but it sounds really bad. So I'd say that in our lab in university at the CESMA lab, it's available. There are two kinds of equipments that allow us to have an on-field measurements, which means that is something that we breathe at ground level, let's say, and we are able to trace the total amount, the size. We go deep into the details of these aerosols because this is very important for the human health and also to understand who is producing these aerosols, so who is responsible for this pollution of the atmosphere. But also we are able to do remote sensing. Remote sensing is something very interesting. With advanced technique, we are able to trace, to monitor the pollution in the atmosphere, in particular the presence of particular matter, by means of laser application, which is able to measure aerosol concentration, not just in a single point, but all by remote. So, which means that in measuring the column of the air from the floor, from the ground up to the end of the troposphere. So the very interesting thing is that thanks to the EU actions, our LIDAR system, which is the possibility to trace this aerosol, is within a net, the early net within the ACRIS project, which is a network of different labs you can see on the map, which use the same technique. So we don't have the tracing of a single point in Europe, but we are trying to have a map of the aerosol in Europe to understand which are the major phenomena of pollution all across on a regional scale. What about data science? Data science is using a very innovative technique for measurements. Is using the satellite, which are able to produce a huge amount of data scanning the surface, but this huge amount of data needs to be interpreted by models. And see here that you can see that the imaging from the satellite can be attributed to many things. The presence of the aerosol in the atmosphere detected by the satellite with the hyperspectral measurements. If you want, we can get into details later. It can be attributed to just to the dust. It could be just a desert dust that is spread around. Or it could be brown carbon, which means that it's basically something that is primarily emitted by combustion systems, or it could be sulfate, which is something that is formed in the atmosphere starting from gaseous pollutants emitted by humans. So this is, for example, what the satellites see over a rural area in Italy and a urban area in Italy. It's interesting to see that on the left you can see that in the rural area, those dots which are representing the presence of aerosol in the atmosphere, so pollution in the atmosphere, it's something that is related to sulfate, which means something that is generated in the atmosphere starting from gaseous pollutant. Whereas in the urban area, brown carbon, which means probably automotive and other combustion systems are primarily emitting this brown carbon particulate, which means that it's completely different to the source of aerosol, which means that if a government wants to take an effective action to reduce the amount of aerosol in the atmosphere, it has to act in two different ways, for example, in this rural area and in this urban area. This is called source apportionment, and it's a mandatory, let's say, approach that we have to adopt. So from now on, when we want to be specific and effective in fighting the pollution of the highly urbanized area, as well as we want to take a climate action against the effect of aerosol presence in the atmosphere. I will stop here and I will thank you for the attention, and I'm available for any question that you want into the details of this that I just presented or other related issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariano. It was a very interesting presentation and a very challenging research area, I would say. We started to have a few questions for Laura, and I would be happy to read to you. The first one is from Bizan. It's related again on the communication, how to communicate, the importance of working on these climate challenges that we have. And in particular is related on, you were talking before about the fact that this is going to be a little bit more partisan, at the very political level. But still, do you believe that working inside communities, you can have a direct impact by, chasing people and letting them consider how important is their own role, how important is the public, intention on dealing with this issue?
Yes, I will definitely answer that question. And I just want to respond really quickly to Mariano's work that he's doing. And I just wanted to say it's exciting to see how the development of these kinds of technologies is allowing us to measure more, right, and better and more accurately. And that means that we can better manage it, right? So you're helping us make better, more effective choices. I really appreciated what you were talking about with the urban and rural approaches and how they would be very different, right? Imagining trying to apply one to the other and not achieving those same kinds of results. What a waste of time and money that would be, right? And again, it goes to this piece of, like kind of multi-solving, right? We're solving multiple issues at the same time. In fact, there was an MIT study that was done on air pollution that found that China is spending more to deal with the health impacts of air pollution from fossil fuels than it would cost to switch those fossil fuels to clean energy at a fast enough rate to meet the Paris agreements. So those kinds of studies and numbers can help us, again, better direct our money to the right things and solve multiple problems at the same time. And then Professor Ventre, sorry to deviate there. I appreciate the question. And so I see it here. So there's kind of the working on the political level, and then there's working with people and individuals and local communities, and how that's changed over time. I actually do have a slide about this, which might be helpful for me to share. So can you see my slide okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to make it larger. No, now you're just seeing the other piece. All right. How about that? Is that showing up?
Yes. Great.
So there's a group called the Yale Program on Climate Communication that works with the George Mason University Center on Climate Change Communication. They've been doing some really interesting studies on the different perceptions that Americans have on climate change. And you might think that it falls into kind of two camps, people who agree with the science and people who don't, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. They've come up with these global warming 6 Americas on climate change. And you can see it goes all the way on the left-hand side to those who are alarmed about climate change, to those who are dismissive all the way over there on the right. You can see, this is from April 2020, that the majority of Americans are alarmed, concerned, or cautious about climate change. So the conversation that people just don't care about, or it's 50-50, right, it is not true, actually. You can see that there is a shift. And to look at how this has changed over time, it's a little bit of a confusing graph, but let me point out a couple of things. This is 2015. This is 2020, so this is time over here on this axis. You can see the number of people, the percentage of Americans who call themselves or who are alarmed about climate change has risen 15 percentage points. It's a pretty significant rise. Concern has, kind of gone down, and there's been this interesting shift. But it's important to know that the number of people who are alarmed has risen considerably. However, the partisan gap, of course, still does exist. So this is a poll of Americans who say that climate change should be a top priority for the president and Congress. So if you're talking with Democrats, you're preaching to the choir, which is why I like engaging with people who are Republicans or lean Republican, because even though it has increased their concern about climate change, this gap still does exist. So that's why, in response to your question before, it was, who do we engage? Who do we engage with? Who do we communicate with? Though that being said, talking with people who are Democrats or lean Democrats is very important, because they can be messengers. And this is an important. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. This is an important piece of the. I think you're all seeing each other now. Sorry about that. Okay, great. So it should be stop sharing. This is an important thing. Who communicates information about climate change is very important. My husband gives me advice all the time, and sometimes my friend says the same exact thing that my husband has said, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And the same thing is true for conversations around climate change. People could hear, people from a different political party say the same thing over and over and over again, and you completely dismiss it, right? But then someone who you trust, someone who is important for you in your community, whether it's a neighbor that you respect, or again, someone, a political elite in your party, or, people trust their doctors, people trust police officers, people trust firefighters, right? There are these people that local professors, there are trusted messengers when it comes to climate change, and or trusted messengers in general. And that's pastors, right? People who are religious leaders that you're affiliated with. These are people that can be important messengers for talking about and normalizing conversations about climate change. So I would say that there are times where I'm not the right person to go in. In fact, in the work that we do in Western PA, I don't go in and talk to the community. We actually work through a community group, and we supply them with research that they say is from us, but I'm not the one having the one-on-one conversations. They're talking with their neighbors about these conversations. So that's a really important way to get people who are not thinking about or working on these issues starting to kind of, change their minds or open up to a new way of thinking about them.
Thank you, Laura. This brings me very nicely to this second question that I have for you. That's from Antonella. Would you share with us one successful story in terms of best communication practice in local communities? That's a tough question.
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the one that I mentioned briefly in my presentation. So there is a county in Pennsylvania that is, it reliably votes Republican, very much reliant on the fossil fuel industry. That has been and still is a lot. It's reliant on coal, but that's now becoming more fracking and natural gas extraction. And both of those industries are in trouble. Coal, very much so. And there's a recognition now that coal is not, you're not keeping coal in PA, and that's on its way out. Natural gas will probably expand, but also there'll be a movement away from natural gas as well. And also the prices are not so great right now. So that's struggling as an economy right now too. And so I can tell you what I didn't do. What I didn't do was go into that community, have conversations with people and say, you should believe climate change. Here's a presentation. Here's my 30 slides about the science on climate change and why you should agree with it. And I'm done. I'm out. Let me answer your questions. And if you don't believe it, you're stupid and you just don't get it. That's obviously the bad way of doing it. Just presenting more data, more research on things doesn't often affect people. I mean, maybe if you're academically minded, it would, right? But if you're not, if you're in a kind of different world of receiving and processing information, that's not going to be an effective way of dealing with it. Another thing that's important to note is that climate change isn't a priority for many people, right? It's not their first priority. We're concerned about our jobs. We're concerned about our safety. We're concerned about if we're, the economy generally, but then also, do we have enough money? Or, are we saving for college, right? There are all of these things that we're concerned about, and we don't know what to do with climate change. So when I go into that community, as I mentioned in my presentation, I listen. I listen to what their concerns are, to what their priorities are, and I try and tie climate change into it. So, they're really, one of the things that our students helped this community understand is the fiscal ties, so the tax structures that are set up in the county that are reliant to coal, and how those are changing over time. What we found is that they're decreasing, and in some counties they are increasing, but not as much as inflation. So overall, it's a bad investment for the community, and this tax structure is not serving them. And in fact, many of their school districts have lost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And for a community of the size that we're talking about, that's quite significant. And that gets people listening. That gets people paying attention. And in some cases, we don't even need to talk about the science of climate change. What we talk about is the future. We say coal is on its way out, and it's possible that in the next 30 years, natural gas won't be a good source of revenue for you either. So let's talk about how your county can be financially stable in, I don't say a low carbon economy, but that's essentially what I mean, right? How can your county be financially stable? How can there be a diverse set of, clean energy or other kinds of industries that your county can rely on from a tax perspective? So we focus on the solutions, and we focus on the solutions that solve their problems, very much in the same way that the people who have been presenting here today, my co-presenters, have talked about. They're not going into these communities you mentioned in India and saying, hey, we're going to give you clean energy. I mean, maybe some of them who are dealing with kick stoves and things, that's something that they immediately are impacted by. But it's, no, we're going to help you understand how to take better care of your family. We're going to help you learn how to run a business or learn how to, kind of be in the marketplace. These are things that are of interest to people. So I would say for anyone who's interested in working on the local level with communities, or frankly, anyone, could be your neighbor, could be your parent, could be your local politician, first get interested in what challenges they're dealing with, they're on top of mind, and how some of the solutions that we're talking about the future, which are very pressing, and we all need to deal with, it's just kind of a matter of when and how fast and how much it costs, taking action on that now could help also solve their problem.
Laura, thank you very much, and I am instructed to be a mean moderator. So now we have to wrap up. So it's the time to close. So let me thank first of all Laura for being with us, for your very interesting presentation, for being available to the questions. Let me also thank the U.S. Consulate in Napoli. This was very helpful in arranging this seminar. And also the co-presenters for their very interesting presentation. And of course, let me thank all the people that were attending with us this presentation. And thank you very much for being with us. So I hope you will be bringing home nice ideas, nice inspiration that we need to work together on the climate change. And so thank you very much. And looking forward for another event with the Futuro Remoto. Thank you and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for hosting us. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.